Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. Tonight's guest is Amber Owens from Indiana Tech. Amber, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
You have the distinction of being the first guest, I believe, who is our second guest from the same place, because Brian was our first guest ever, and you're the second guest from Indiana Tech, so thanks for doing this.
Awesome.
Actually, I correct myself. You're the third guest from Indiana Tech, because Stacy Luger-Britton was on last week.
Oh.
So we have quite a run of Indiana Tech folks.
Very nice.
So, Amber, you are currently in an MBA program at, believe it or not, Indiana Tech.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about how is that going? How far along are you, and how are you enjoying it? I don't know if enjoying is the right word for an MBA, but tell me a little bit about that.
No, it's good. So I'm actually very, very close to the end. I'm in my last class.
Okay.
3 weeks left, 2.5 now, until
right.
I am done for good. It's been about an 18-month journey so far. Obviously, when I enrolled, I didn't think that we would be in a pandemic while trying to finish.
Yeah.
But no, it's not been too bad. I've been in online classes before, and our MBA program is online, so it's been something that I've been used to. But mostly I decided to go with the MBA at Indiana Tech because I have my bachelor's degree in communications and new media production, which is just a fancy way to say I studied how to make stuff for social media.
Sure.
But this kind of gives me the business side of it. So I like to say I've got the creative communications side, but now I can also see like the higher level business organization side. So it's nice to kind of have the full scope.
Yeah, and I did a similar path. I was an English major and did a master's in English, and I realized that prepared me really well for some things and not at all for others, and then ended up doing the MBA at Indiana Tech to fill in some of those same gaps. So I definitely feel you on that one and the need to get a little bit broader base of experience. So is it the capstone course that you're in now?
No, I actually took that one last session.
Okay.
My classes got a little mixed up because some of them are only offered like odd sessions or whatnot. So I'm actually in international marketing right now. So I'm finishing out the marketing MBA with marketing. So that's kind of a nice touch.
All right. Well, and you not only are a student of Indiana Tech, you are the social media manager for Indiana Tech. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about how you got to that place, what that job is like, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the projects you're working on. You and I have talked about your work frequently, and I know that there's challenges. There's good things, but there's also a lot of challenges that people may not realize social media managers have. So we'll talk through some of that. But let's start with your career path. So tell us, Amber, where did you grow up, and what were some of the stops you made along the way to Indiana Tech?
Yeah, so I grew up in a little town in Ohio, very, very small. And moved to Indiana when I was in grade school. I kind of lived in that town until I graduated high school. Not a lot going on. It was in Warsaw, which is somewhat nearby. But I actually didn't know what I wanted to do. Like a lot of kids, teenagers, I was just kind of lost. And so I graduated high school at 16. Very early, and that was another reason why I was like, this is not a time for me to decide on a career move.
Sure. Had you skipped ahead, or did you start young, or?
Both.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I started in Ohio, which their cutoff dates were a little bit different.
Okay.
So I was already the youngest person in my grade. So when I transferred to Indiana, I was a year behind. And then come high school, I decided to graduate early, which then put me 2 years kind of ahead. It was very weird, but I got my diploma about 8 weeks before I turned 17.
Wow.
So I mean, my driver's license still had fresh ink, so I wasn't ready to like make many big choices.
Yeah.
So I took some time off, and then I enrolled in a community college. I went to Ivy Tech, and that was probably one of the best things I could do. I fell in love with communication and communications courses at Ivy Tech. I was originally an English major.
Yep.
And I spent several years doing that. It was the thing that I'm naturally good at. I can write papers in my sleep.
Yeah.
I actually wrote a book last year in the middle of grad school and work.
Wow.
And it's mine. Like everybody's got their one skill. I can write.
So fiction, nonfiction?
Fiction, yep.
Okay, all right.
And so after spending a lot of time doing English classes and stuff, I took a mass communications course with a woman who ended up being my mentor. Her name is Lori Rose. She still works at Ivy Tech. She's a wonderful woman. And I just couldn't get enough. And it was like, this is so cool, seeing how people communicate and why they communicate the way that they do, and that just sort of kicked it off. So I transferred to Manchester University, where I took more media-based classes, and that was really like my selling point, was getting to learn about why social media works the way that it does, why people use it the way that they do, how it evolves, why it fills certain needs versus others. And then after that, I kind of knew, like, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. So let me back up for just a second, because in addition to having the good fortune of working with Indiana Tech, Asher also works with Ivy Tech. We're big fans of what Ivy Tech does. What was it that made you think Ivy Tech was going to be a good fit for you, and why was that such a good experience?
It was a couple of things. I can't deny that the practicality of a community college was a big selling point, since I didn't know what I wanted to do. I saw my friends graduate high school and go right to IU or Purdue, and they were spending a lot of money, and they still didn't know what they wanted to do. And so I was like, I don't know what I want to do, so I'm not ready to spend $20,000 figuring it out when I can get started here. It's close to home. I can commute. I can dip my toe in it and see if this is something that I even want to do, because I was never a big school person. I wasn't a great student in high school. But when I got to Ivy Tech, I was really surprised, because the Warsaw campus was small enough that I got a lot of time with my teachers. I met my mentor, Lori. I made connections and relationships that I don't think I would have at a four-year university, and it really, truly felt like home. And I started excelling in classes, and I was in the Honor Society, and I became president of the Honor Society, and I just got really, really involved. And it gave me this sort of purpose that I hadn't had before. And I don't think it would have happened had I gone to a big 4-year residential school.
And that's what we've found from some of the student stories that we've had the opportunity to be involved in, is that, like any choice, it's not for everyone, but there are students who really find their way and go on to really great things. So you are one of the first people that I ever met who actually studied social media before doing it professionally, because there was a long period of time where it was, learning by doing, and I've said this before on the podcast, but, Russian history majors and English majors and business majors learning social media post-college, whereas you actually studied it when you were in school. So what were some of the things that you learned in school that prepared you for what you're going to be doing professionally?
It was really kind of a unique approach that I had at Manchester, because it wasn't just, this is how people communicate online, but I had a professor who looked at it as he was always looking at the why. And I will never forget, one of the first media studies lessons we did was about the show Survivor. And how fans of the show used social media to try and track where the show was filming. And this is very, very early in the 2000s. And so, Facebook hadn't been developed yet. I think it was a lot of live journal boards and message boards and stuff. And seeing that this platform that was emerging became a resource for people, and they adapted to it, but they still made it their own. And it became this sort of transformative space. And that was a really interesting take on social media, because I grew up with the development of things like Xanga and MySpace, and I remember, setting up my Facebook page when you still had to be verified by people you went to school with. So learning kind of the grassroots of social media, and then how it affected society and how society affected it. Because it is kind of a give and take, and it's the first sort of media channel where it is a two-way street. That was really what kind of made the difference in learning about it. It wasn't just sort of this passive experience, but a really active participatory thing.
The first mass media channel we've ever had where it really is, owned by the users. And I remember my first social media account was Friendster. I remember saying, I don't know what this is, but I know it's going to change everything. I don't know how it's going to change everything, but I want to be part of it. And obviously, being older than you, I was jumping in later in life, but it was kind of like, okay, I can actually go along for the ride. I don't have to watch this from a distance.
It's interesting. Obviously, it's evolved even since I was studying it in college as, a subject. Things like Snapchat were very, very different than they are now. And TikTok didn't exist. TikTok's predecessor, Musical.ly, didn't exist. Facebook was still the it platform. MySpace was just barely going out. Like it's the pace at which it evolves to is another thing that I find really, really interesting. And I think you and I have talked about before, like why TikTok became popular is because it filled like a niche gap that hadn't been filled yet. And that's what I love to see. And I kind of try to approach my job in that same sort of mind space of not just what should we be doing here, but why are the people here that are looking at our stuff? Like, why are they here? What do they want? And it's not just what we want to give them.
Well, and being the social media manager for Indiana Tech, you've got multiple audiences that you need to meet where they are. You've got the traditional student who is probably, mostly going to be focused on TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram. And then you've got adult students who are going to be more Facebook, some of them, on Instagram as well. But you got to know a lot about a lot in order to do your job. And I'm sure that's something you think about every day. So am I correct that you also did some social media work as a volunteer prior to starting at Indiana Tech?
Yeah. So my career path was like a little unconventional because I ended up finishing my degree at Trine online. So I didn't do a traditional internship. So I didn't get a lot of work experience in college, which meant that I was kind of on my own. And I ended up working for one of the orthopedic companies as like a project manager. And I was miserable. It was the worst choice for a person like me. I was... I made the best of it. It was a great job to have, but creatively I was so unfulfilled.
I had one of those jobs around the same time in my career, and I think most people who are creatively minded have that experience and don't want to go back to it.
I mean, it taught me a lot. Working in the corporate environment was really, really great. I'll never forget the things that I learned there, and I'm very, very thankful for it. But I was so desperate to get a shot, basically, that I saw. I was very, very interested in greyhounds, and we ended up adopting a retired racing greyhound, my husband and I, when we bought our house in 2017. And I followed the rescue that we worked with to get our dog, and they had a media team that they were looking for help with, and I had not been able to find any sort of foot in the door opportunities. So I was like, hey, this is what I studied. I would love to do this even if it's for free. And again, because I wasn't being very creatively fulfilled at work, I had a lot of that energy on the side and a lot of, I would almost call it desperation to do it. And so I signed on, and I ended up doing that for about 2 full years. But that was really what got me my job at Indiana Tech, was I could say, hey, here's my work for an actual organization. I'm not getting paid for it, but you can still see that I do it. And maybe that's even more of proof that I actually love to do it because I'm willing to do it for free.
Well, that's a super smart thing, and that's a great example. I'm going to use that story as an example because one of the things when I talk to college students, they'll always say, well, every job wants you to have experience. How do you get experience before you get your first job? And one of the answers I've given over the years is you find a nonprofit that needs the thing you want to do, and you do it. So now we have a case study in that through your experience. So you started at Indiana Tech, remind me, is that 2.5, 3 years ago?
Yeah, it was in August of 2018, so August about 2.5 years ago.
Okay, and you were new to higher ed. You're new to Indiana Tech. Did you know anyone at Indiana Tech, or was this all brand new?
It was all completely brand new. I will admit, so my mom was actually a CPS student at Indiana Tech roughly 8 years prior.
Got it.
And my impression of Indiana Tech was a lot like Ivy Tech, where I thought it was just an online thing. It was not quite a trade school, but it wasn't a full thing. And I got sent the job posting for my current position, and I actually didn't think that I was qualified. And somebody convinced me that I should just throw my hat in the ring. Why not? And I told my husband about it, and he's like, oh yeah, their campus is downtown. It's actually really nice. And I kid you not, I stopped in my tracks, and I was like, they have a campus? And he was astonished that I didn't know. And so we got in the car, and he drove me downtown, and he's like, this is Indiana Tech. And I was like, no way. And I was amazed that the university had this traditional campus for university students coming out of high school that I had no idea existed. And it was so close to my own home where I'd grown up for 10 years that it was just this completely foreign environment that I couldn't believe I'd lived so long without even recognizing that it was around. So.
Yeah. So not only are you new to Indiana Tech, not only are you new to higher ed, but you're the first person doing this job. There's no template, there's no predecessor. So how do you get started in that type of environment?
It was very much the just jump in and hope you can swim sort of an environment, which I don't mind. Bless my supervisor, Matt. He is very trusting when it comes, and I'll never forget the first week. They, first day, they're like, "Here are all the passwords, have fun." And I was like, wow, okay. So, I get started and I'm drafting up some posts, and I don't know what this workflow is going to look like. So I kind of scoop my computer over and I give him this caption, and I'm like, "Hey, does this, post text look okay? Is this in line with your branding, your voice? Is this, obviously I'm trying this for the first time. So please tell me if I'm off." He's like, "I trust you, go for it." And obviously that's kind of the gist of my whole job, was basically, we trust you, you're the expert, go ahead. And it was really nice because it gave me the freedom to learn at my own pace and to figure those things out on my own and not feel like I was already behind.
Well, that's great, and it really hits on something. I mean, you're ringing a lot of bells in my brain, because one of the things that I talk about, you've been good enough to be a guest speaker in a social media class that I teach. One of the things I talk about is, what skills do you need to do this job well? And I say, number one is be a good communicator. Number two is be a good communicator, but number one is have really good judgment. Because so much of it is you got to trust the person doing the job. And I say, knowing social media is important, but it's a distant third to those two things. And it sounds like that's two of the skills you brought into the job.
Yeah, I've told this to other folks before that I think my number one thing or skill is just to be able to trust my gut and to know what's right when it's right and what's wrong, if something's going on or whatnot. And having, a department or a team that also supports that is really nice, because I've seen social media managers and social teams that are built very differently, where there's multiple levels of approvals for posts, and I know that I couldn't work like that, because it's so regimented that you lose that sort of personal touch, and you also don't have the fluidity to make those judgments as you need to.
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing that I think everybody either learns the hard way or they know instinctively is that audiences today have a really, really well-refined BS meter. And if it seems like it's gone through a lot of approvals, they're going to know that, and they're not going to find it credible. So it's good that you have a team that trusts you to sort of speak with a human voice. So here's what I want to focus on. Normally, I have people talk about their organization, but between Brian and Stacy, we've been over that ground pretty well. I want to talk as candidly as you're comfortable about the work of a social media manager. Because one of the things I really appreciate about you, Amber, is how open you are about saying, hey, if you're looking at this as a career path, some of it is really great and fulfilling, and there's parts that are really difficult. And let's talk about, again, whatever you're comfortable with. How do you describe the work that you do to people who maybe are aspiring to move into that career path?
It is both like the best thing that I've ever done and also the worst. Like I am very open, especially on my Twitter account, with the bad side of social, and I do that for a very specific reason. And that's because when I was first starting out, I'd already been with the Greyhound organization for over a year. So I had a decent handle on kind of those experiences. And I still remember the first time I read an article by a social media manager that they were talking about the negatives of the industry and the stress that can come along with it, and the constant sort of feeling that you should be online all the time, that you can't disconnect. And I remember feeling so astounded that other people felt like that too. And I was like, oh, I'm not alone. And that feeling of community in that these are shared experiences was immediately something that I wanted to talk about, because again, like there's this very glamorized approach to social media, and I've gotten it from people, and it's some of it is joking and others is a little more serious, where you get a lot of the you work in social media, so you're just on Instagram all day, or you're just on Twitter all day, and you're
having fun all day.
It is very fun. I've never been more creatively fulfilled, and there are days when I'm on the job and I feel like I stop what I'm doing and I think to myself, God, I feel so lucky. I love this job. I'm passionate about this job. It's amazing. And I can't think of anything else I would ever want to do.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, there's a lot of, unfortunate things that happen on social media. And a lot of people don't quite talk about those, where, you can get nude photos in your Facebook inbox, and it's what do you do, right? Or you've got people who are angry and they don't realize that it's just one person who are fielding those angry things. You're yelling at somebody on Twitter, but do you really know who you're yelling at? Or people that you work with, they're not doing it maliciously, but they might think that they know your job better than you, so they're oftentimes trying to make suggestions without seeing the whole picture, and it can just be so frustrating, where it's like, I wish I could just be trusted to do my job.
Yeah, well, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, because it's the first really, the first mass media vehicle where the audience is a participant in it. That means everybody has experience in it. That means anybody with a Facebook account thinks they know how to do your job.
Yes, my favorite thing is, it's like, just because you know how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich doesn't mean you're a chef. Just because you know how to drive a car doesn't mean you're a professional race car driver.
For sure.
There's casual use and there's professional use, and they're so very, very different. So
well, and one of the things, again, in the class that I think you've probably echoed or at least heard me say is that, it's almost like the things that qualify you to be good at social media personally disqualify you from being good at it professionally.
Yes.
If you're used to everything you post, being, cheered by your friends, wait until you post something that's bad news on social media. So, and there's another aspect too that you've talked about candidly that I really appreciate, and it's the difficulty of turning it off, because, almost every job in 2021, there's always something else you could do at the end of the day, but you're always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Always. And I would even say that it's gotten worse in the last year with COVID and the development of the pandemic and the impact that it's had on every industry, not just higher ed. And there's things that happen just internally that can also be causing issues. And there was a period last year where I was actually so stressed out about checking our notifications that I was on the verge of tears for like days, because it was so much, and I never knew if it was going to be good or bad. And you were hoping and praying that it wasn't bad. And you add that to just the default of the job too, is that it's the first thing you check in the morning and it's the last thing you check at night. I've not ever taken a vacation where I've not checked our notifications or been emailed about something that's been going wrong. And that's nothing to say for my team, but you don't turn it off because you physically can't. And it's not as easy as just putting your out of office message and scheduling some posts and saying, I'll see you guys in a week. It is truly something that, even if you are out of the office, it is such a bad habit that I find myself on the weekends, at 10 p.m. at night, I just go into our Facebook and I check our notifications. I make sure we don't have any messages. I make sure nothing's going wrong, because one of the worst things as the social media manager is somebody's going on a rant on Twitter and you don't see it until Monday. And it's like, you don't want to leave those things just in case. So, and I once called it Schrodinger's notifications. You don't know if it's going to be good or bad, but the anxiety is going to make you check it anyways, even if you're off the clock.
Well, and it sort of exacerbates some of the social problems with social media. I work in the social media space, not nearly as deep as you are in it, but I had the luxury of deactivating Facebook in January again and saying, I'm just going to leave. You don't have that luxury.
Unfortunately not, no. And I wish that I did, and I've thought about it, because I'm one of the few social media managers, I think. I'm actually not a big fan of Facebook. I like, as a company, I mean, not just a platform, but I feel like they're doing some not so great things.
Sure.
And I would love to just get rid of it so that I'm not contributing to it, or that I don't even have to see it. But if I did that, I would still have to make a dummy profile or an empty profile to manage our pages. And it's frustrating because we're exempt from that possibility.
Yeah. So where, if you don't mind sharing, where are you active personally on social media, knowing that this dominates your professional life?
Yeah.
Do you have time for, the more personal end of it? And if so, where do you spend your time?
It's a little bit scattered, and it just depends on what I want to do.
Yeah.
So if I want to complain, I go to Twitter, and that's where I, make my funny tweets about my job being frustrating.
Your social media manager bingo game that you came up with, I like that one a lot. Yeah.
That still gets likes and retweets on it. It's still resonating with people, which I find very, very funny and satisfying. But if I just want sort of mindless entertainment, I spend a lot of time on TikTok to the point where I actually had to delete it from my device because I was averaging like 4 hours a day.
Wow. Okay.
It was a lot, but it's designed to suck you in.
Yeah, sure.
But in terms of keeping in touch with friends and stuff, I spend a lot of time on Instagram because I'm lucky that I don't have a lot of people who get super heavy on Instagram. I have a lot of friends who do some really interesting things. One in particular that I really enjoyed this was well before COVID, but I had a friend who took a road trip with her Greyhound, actually, and she took it across the country, and they slept in a mattress in the back of her car.
Yeah.
And she updated where they were going through the country with stops and stuff, and it almost felt like I was there with her, and it was so fun to see in such a casual, non-performative way that it was just like, hey, we're at this really cool rest stop in the middle of Nebraska, here's my dog, and it was just, it's those sorts of things where I feel like I've cultivated my social media accounts at the personal level to be very, very intimate. I don't follow influencers. I don't follow a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
It's just the people that I actually know physically in real life.
Yeah.
And I think that helps.
Well, and it's funny listening to you talk because it's so similar to the approach that I've taken, where Instagram to me is light, but even though it's lighter, the same time I deactivated Facebook, I said, I'm going to unfollow a bunch of accounts on Instagram. And I unfollowed every business that wasn't a client and every person I didn't have some real world connection to, celebrities and stuff like that. And now my scroll is like literally 15 seconds. Okay, I've seen everything. And it's just there are platforms that are much more anxiety inducing. It's one of the reasons why I like LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is kind of boring. You're not going to get a lot of drama, and you can get in and out of it pretty quickly and go on with the rest of your life, as opposed to other platforms where I didn't have the discipline to do that. So let's talk about some of the positives. What are some things that you've experienced that you're proud of, or work that you did that you said, I can point to this making a difference?
I think the biggest thing is something that I did last year when COVID initially hit the U.S. and a lot of universities started going remote, was right around mid-March.
Yep.
And it was a really frustrating time for a lot of people because there were so many things happening. We were, in between government mandated quarantines, shutdowns, whatever we want to call them, and places were closing, stores were closing, there were curfews and restrictions, and everything was happening all at once, and information was changing by the day. Obviously, Indiana Tech wasn't immune to that, and so we ended up sending our students home for spring break, and then they never came back. And everything changed so rapidly, I want to say in the course of like 2 or 3 weeks, where they thought they were coming back, and then all of a sudden it's like, nope, you're done for the whole semester, so we'll mail you your stuff, sorry.
Yeah, because the game changed along the way.
Yeah, it was so fast. And the one thing that I realized with the situation as a whole was that a lot of people were going to be looking for answers. I knew I was looking for answers, and so I was trying to think, what does my audience want? Again, and the one thing I kept coming back to was answers. And so I essentially made it my mission to turn our social media platforms into a source of information. And another thing with social is one of the beautiful things about it is that you're able to go where the people are. You're not forcing them to come to you like with a website or, some other venue where they have to seek you out. They're already on social. So if they're following you, you've got a direct link to them. So I wanted to take advantage of that. And I also wanted to fulfill that need that I knew was there. And so I kind of took it upon myself to answer as many questions as I could. Yeah. And I actually tallied it up last month, and over the course of, I think, 3 months, I answered over 100 individual questions. And that's not including duplicates, because a lot of them were duplicates. But I answered every single one, including the duplicates, by either publicly answering it and or privately messaging people. Yeah. I held 3 separate Instagram Ask Me Anything sessions with no even specific topic. Yeah. It was, ask us what you're confused about. Ask us what you need to, and I will find you the answer. I helped to put together a composite, a compilation document of resources for students going online, things that could help them. We did a Facebook Live Q&A session with the coaches and, figures on campus. And I essentially, for about 6 months, made it my mission to get as much information as possible out to our audiences. And that audience included not only students, but parents and families. And I started to get a lot of comments back, specifically from parents saying thank you. Mm-hmm. And I didn't go into it looking for thanks. I just knew I want answers. And I'm sure if I were a student, I would be confused about what's going on. So I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible, because if they don't know who to go to ask about returning textbooks, or how they're going to get their stuff back from their dorm, or what they can do, if they still live in Fort Wayne but want to come to campus to study because they don't have internet at their house. Yeah. There's a whole slew of questions that they were going to have that they weren't going to know who to go to. And so I could figure it out probably a lot easier than they could. Yeah. So I made myself that person, and I made myself available. And it made a big difference to a lot of people. And that was something that kind of offset the stress from it in a really great way. Yeah, and
observing that from the outside looking in, it's one of the best things I saw was the transparency in that. It was kind of let's not pretend this is something it isn't. Let's use, for example, Instagram stories just to get questions out there, to really crowdsource what are the problems. Let's get answers out there. And that was, really, really laudable, the work that you did there. And I think it's really reflective, and I mean this very genuinely. What I see with Indiana Tech social media presence is a different level of transparency. And I think some of that is the right team, and that includes, the President Einoff, doing things like going on Instagram stories and talking about hurting his knee and being very open about, hey, this isn't great, but I'm going to make the best of it. Whereas, a lot of university presidents have to have that veneer and everything's great. And, he was optimistic about it, but he still, had some knee problems and was honest about it.
Yeah, he really has been incredibly helpful to set the tone, because I will never forget when I came on in 2018, one of the first things that my creative director told me was that I was really going to like President Einoff, because his first year when he had the new student orientation for our traditional day students is he stood on stage and he pulled out his cell phone and he gave all of the freshmen and their parents his personal cell phone. And he said, if you guys have any problems, if you guys have any questions, here's how you reach me. Yeah. And I think that sets the tone that it's nobody's too good to answer even the smallest question. And I think with my job, I was in a really great position. And another thing that about this is later on in the summer, when we're coming back to reopen for fall, they had set up an email. It was covid@indianatech.edu for questions. And I was on a committee, and the committee was like, oh, we only got 3 questions this week. I think we're doing good. And I had to unmute myself, and I'm like, I got 35 on Instagram last week, so if we could add those to that list, that would be great. And they were astounded. They're like, oh. And so I had them, typed up, and I showed them. So even then, there was kind of this, I don't want to call it a disconnect, but just a sense of awareness about where these people are going for information. And some of that is probably because I set myself up to do that. But it's very helpful to be able to harness it, to be able to funnel it into the place that it needs to be.
Well, and if it's used well, it's an ongoing focus group. I mean, it's an opportunity for the institution to surface what are some of the weak spots, what are some of the things that could be better, and to know what's on the mind of students. So, All right, so let's talk now about some of the stuff you're working on. Obviously, there's the day-to-day implementation work, but what are some of the big things that you're looking at, either long range or, thinking about the brand? What are some things that are either keeping you up at night or making you excited, or both?
Honestly, ever since I came onto the job, and this really goes back to something I said before, is I grew up, I think we moved to Indiana, I want to say in the year 2000, 2002, somewhere around there. I grew up for 15 years without knowing that Indiana Tech had a traditional campus.
Yeah.
I was very, very well versed with the College of Professional Studies and the online programs and the adult programs because they're everywhere. They're online. There's a huge marketing presence dedicated to those. But how could I grow up 30 miles away from this campus and not even realize that it existed? So that was my one big sort of push, is to recognize that in a way that it hadn't been done before. And so I'm always looking for ways to not only capitalize our traditional stuff, but our CPS too. But it's a little bit more of a creative outlet to do stuff for our traditional students, which is what makes me excited. And in the last year and a half, I've launched a Giphy channel to put out some branded GIFs for Instagram stories and Snapchat and stuff. And we just hit 2 million views on our GIF channel.
Yeah.
And that's something that's like, I call it the gift that keeps on giving because it's so easy to do, but it's a way to get our brand in front of people who either might not know about it or who want it but couldn't get it before.
Sure.
And so I'm always excited about, new GIF ideas that we can do. Commencement's coming up this year. I'm already brainstorming specific commencement GIFs. And to me, that almost takes the place of, your old Facebook filters or Snapchat filters and stuff, because it's something that can be done so easily with no cost.
Yeah.
It's, 2 million views on something and we spent no money.
Yeah.
So that's a big one that I'm excited about, but also just harnessing more student-focused content, whether that's something that the students make themselves or that they want. I'm trying to do less of, this is what I want to give you, and more of, what do you want from us? And so those are, I think, my big two.
Yeah. Well, and so question, are you going to walk graduation yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to work it and I'm going to walk it at the same time. So we're actually talking about if I wanted to strap a GoPro.
I was going to say, maybe multiple GoPros.
Yeah, I work very closely with our photographer and videographer. And just the other day I said, so we're going to have an opportunity for some pretty cool point of view stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
This is not just taking a selfie on stage with President Einoff. We could do whatever you want. And so we're talking, we're going to make 2 videos, our traditional longer form video, and then a special social cut for commencement. And I think that that's going to be something that will be exciting to do that we haven't done before. And we've also, something I started last year that went over really, really well, is a slow motion confetti booth.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we wanted to do that at commencement last year, but it got canceled. So I want to do it this year too. So not only will I be covering it for work, walking in it, but I'm also going to try to run this slow motion confetti booth. So
very much the example of you can't ever get away from your job, even when you're graduating. Yeah. Okay. Well, Amber, let's switch to the sort of the speed round of the show, where I ask 3 questions that are similar to the ones we talked about, but I'm going to spin it a little bit differently for you. The first one I'll keep consistent about career path, especially if you're talking to someone who's thinking of going into a career in social media management. What's your best piece of advice?
That's tough, because I think that it's going to depend on a lot of factors, but I would ask them one question. Instead of giving advice, I would ask them one question, which is, why do you want to do this? If it is for the fame and the fortune and the glory, that's
run away.
Probably the wrong answer.
Yeah.
If you're doing it because you think that you could do it better, or because you're fascinated by the platforms or the evolution of it, you have to have your reason. And if your why isn't good enough, you're going to burn out really, really fast. Because the only thing that's kept me doing this, even in the short time, in the last 4 years now that I've done it, is the fact that I do deeply love it. And if that wasn't there, if I was just doing it to get popular or doing it for virality, I think I would have burnt out by now.
Yeah, for sure. Second question, and typically I ask people to describe their organization briefly, but how do you describe the work of a social media manager in a concise way?
That's even tougher. I would probably say that it's the one way to get information out to people, whether they like it or not. It's sometimes it's pretty pictures of nice things, and other times it's breaking news, and other times it's, you know, things in the middle of the night that you don't want to have to deal with. It's anything and everything that you see on social that you might not realize is happening.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to throw another curveball at you, because typically I ask people for some kind of wisdom, and you've already given us some really good stuff around the real work of being a social media manager. So what is one of your favorite pieces of content that's out there that doesn't get enough appreciation? It could be a social media account, it could be a video, it could be a GIF you've created, it could be just about anything. Does anything come to mind?
Oh, honestly, I think that short form video is probably my favorite, and it's my favorite because it's hard to do and people don't realize how hard it is. And I think that's also why platforms like Vine were really, really popular, is because you can do a lot of really great, really funny stuff in not a lot of time, and it's why TikTok works. But I feel like other platforms, you know, Facebook specifically, YouTube, they're always pushing for longer form videos. You know, you get rewards for doing 3-minute long videos, but nobody sits through those. If you can clearly and concisely get your message across in like 15 seconds, I think that's amazing. And that's talent when it comes to producing video. I feel like that's kind of one that's been overlooked a lot. So.
Well, and it's pretty common, but that doesn't mean it's easy. And there's a lot of creative folks out there. Well, Amber, we have successfully kept you off your phone.
I know.
For nearly an hour. So congratulations.
It's a new record.
Part of you is probably freaking out about what's going on when you get back to it. So we'll let you get back to it. But thank you very much for sharing your story. Really appreciate the work you do for Indiana Tech and how transparent you are in sharing the good and the bad that comes with it.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.